Kia ora, good evening. Construction of the Around the Mountain cycle trail from Walter Peak to Kingston can now start, with government signing off on funding. A new $4 million funding agreement has been signed between Ngā Haringia, the New Zealand Cycle Trail and Southland District Council. Government had originally committed funding to the project, but the resource consent process and delays meant Council failed to meet milestone criteria and the contract had to be renegotiated. Council Chief Executive David Adamson says the new agreement has very tight timetables, which Council will be working hard to meet. The trail will be completed in 2 stages, the first by October 31st and the second by December 2015. Government has announced the minimum wage will increase, but some unions say it isn't enough. Labour Minister Simon Bridges announced the minimum wage will rise 25 cents to $13.75 an hour. Training and new entrants minimum wages will also rise from $10.80 to $11. Mr Bridges says it's a balance between protecting low-paid workers and ensuring jobs aren't lost as economic recovery gains pace. The Council of Trade Unions says it's not enough to keep low-income families out of poverty. The rates come into effect on April 1st. Invercargill could soon have a new canine facility with a proposed new dog park, a step closer to reality. The first ever dedicated dog park has been given the go-ahead in Invercargill. City Council yesterday gave the concept approval and heard submissions on the proposal. Among those speaking, Southland Kennel Association President Diane Tyson.
We think the dog park is an absolutely wonderful idea and congratulate South Alive on being proactive about this. In other parts of New Zealand, and I can personally speak about Dunedin, which has 3 dog parks, and Christchurch, which has 5, which are utilised by many dog people travelling to and from venues for showing and also just travelling. And it has been rather embarrassing in the past that when exhibitors have come for our championship shows in November, that we really have nowhere to send them.
The proposed site is next to Russell Square within the city's green belt to cater for some of Invercargill's more than 8,000 dogs. The South Alive group originally put the idea forward, and Chairman Colin Anderson says the proposed site is seen as the best option.
We considered a number of areas and have gone through a set of criteria to narrow that down to this area being the most preferred area for a dog park.
One of the challenges was identifying whether it could be used as a dog park.
One of the first things we had to do was convince council that a dog park on a reserve area would be a permitted use.
South Alive presented plans to council yesterday, essentially a fenced area with double gates where dogs and owners can socialise. However, council asked that this be revisited due to some concerns around the fence design. The cost of fencing could be anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000, and Mr Anderson says it's hoped some of the costs can be covered by revenue from dog registration.
There may be an option to use some of the money that's gathered for dog registration fees to assist either in the costing of fencing or in the maintenance of the park.
178 submissions were made on the concept, with just 2 opposed.
I think overwhelmingly Invercargill supports the idea of a dog park. The only concept that needed to be looked at was where that park was going to be.
With council giving support to the concept and location, the next step is for fencing options and a finalised design to be put forward. Margot Sutherland, South Today News. The Spirit of New Zealand is in port at Bluff, the ship's first visit in 7 years. Today, a public sailing saw 70 to 80 people experience life on board and have a turn sailing. The ship is circumnavigating New Zealand to mark the 40th anniversary of the Spirit of Adventure Trust. The trust was formed to give young New Zealanders a character development program in a maritime environment. On its voyage, new crews have been picked up every 10 days, with a new crew of 40 teens set to sail from Bluff bound for New Plymouth tomorrow. After the break, why Fish and Game Southland is bringing in changes for duck hunters. Welcome back. Lead shot in duck hunting is to be phased out in Southland over the next 3 years. Fish and Game Southland has announced it will phase out an exemption which allows hunters to use lead shot in 20-gauge shotguns near waterways more than 3 metres wide. Southland Fish and Game Manager Maurice Rodway says hunters won't have to stop hunting and will only lose a few metres in range, which only requires a slight change in hunting tactics. He says the move benefits the environment, health of ducks and credibility. Some opposition is expected.
There is quite a lot of opposition to it at the moment, particularly in the Gore area. And the Shooters World and Gore have had representatives down here. And we had quite a lively meeting, shall we say, at our annual meeting last year in December. And those hunters expressed their concerns. But we've also done a lot of surveys, and the councillors have talked to other hunters. And what we find is that at least half the hunters think that there should be the change. So the council was quite determined to try and bring it through. So that's what we think will happen.
Now, what will this actually mean for hunters?
Well, it's a 4-year phase-in period. So those hunters that are thinking about buying a 20-gauge shotgun because they want to continue to use lead, really that's a message to them to say that that's not going to be a very good idea. It will mean that hunters who are not comfortable using steel shot, which is the non-toxic shot, will probably need to do a little bit more homework into how to hunt birds successfully with steel shot. And it's not that simple. Steel shot does have different ballistic characteristics to lead. So hunters have got to be a little bit more savvy. They've got to try and get the birds in a little bit closer and recognise those different characteristics. The shot goes out a bit faster. It's a smaller mass of pellets, so they have to be a little bit more accurate too.
So why bring this in?
Well, the council's very concerned about lead shot being shot out into the environment, into waterways. It certainly has an adverse effect on waterfowl, not only mallard ducks but other ducks as well, and other water birds that might pick this lead shot up as grit, and then it basically kills them. So we've got to avoid that. Fish and Game is an organisation that is proud of its reputation as a protector of the environment. So it's not acceptable for us to allow this to continue when it doesn't really need to.
15 years ago, American state Oregon introduced legislation around assisted dying or euthanasia for the terminally ill. In New Zealand, a private member's bill, the End of Life Choice Bill, has been put forward by Labour MP Marion Street. These are set to be discussed in Invercargill tonight with a community forum at the Lindisfarne Community Centre. End of Life Choice Media and Political Relations Manager Yvonne Shaw says she thinks people should be allowed to choose.
It's important that people have a choice at end of life, that they're allowed to access a death that reflects their values and beliefs. And if that includes using assisted dying, then that needs to be an option. That doesn't mean it's an option for everyone. And in Oregon, less than 0.5% of all deaths are through the Death with Dignity Act. And yet people feel great comfort knowing it's available should they need it.
What was the reaction back in Oregon to this actually coming in?
It took a while for the legislation to be passed, but the reaction now is very positive and supportive. And in fact, similar legislation has been passed since then in Washington, and 8 other states in America are eyeing similar legislation.
So why is this something that you think would be well received here in New Zealand?
Marianne Street was approached by some of her constituencies, and they've asked her to forward legislation like this. So she is the Labour MP who has brought this forth as a private member's bill. And surveys have shown that 63% of New Zealanders across all demographics either support or strongly support legislation that allows them some choices at the end of life.
Now, this was something that only just passed in Oregon. Do you think we're going to end up with the same situation here?
This passed 15 years ago in Oregon, 4 years ago in Washington, and the legislation here is modeled in part after Oregon's legislation, as well as European legislation. So we'll see what the MPs have to say about it.
Now, you've been travelling the country talking about this. What kind of response have you had from the public?
It's been overwhelmingly positive, an overwhelmingly positive response. And people have many questions about this, and they should, but they're really, really eager to engage in the conversations.
Now, not everybody agrees with this proposed legislation. One argument or concern that's been raised is that this would mean New Zealand was taking steps towards non-voluntary end of life. What's your response to that?
The response to that is that in 15 years in Oregon, that hasn't happened. We're still at less than 0.5% of all deaths through assisted dying. And the Dutch have not had that experience either. Theirs is still less than 2%. So the arguments for a slippery slope, meaning that this will go from only people who want it to then progress to more and more people, it just hasn't been borne out in the statistics.
A group of Invercargill students received a gift today to help improve their literacy. 55 pupils at Fernworth Primary School were given their own dictionaries today as part of the Dictionaries in Schools program. The presentation was part of an ongoing Invercargill North Rotary project, which will see 1,600 dictionaries given to young Year 4 pupils at around 80 Southland schools this year. Now in its 5th year, the project aims to help children with reading and writing. Worth around $30 each, the dictionaries are sponsored by Rotary, the Community Trust of Southland, CRT and Main Freight. The sounds of harp music from South America, North America and Europe rang through Rosedale Bible Chapel in Invercargill last night. Paraguayan folk harpist Edward Klassen played to an intimate crowd at the chapel. The harpist is on a 3-month world tour, playing in chapels and churches throughout New Zealand before heading to Australia, Israel and Germany. Growing up in an isolated area in Paraguay, the harpist saw his first paved highway at 15 before studying to play the harp. Shortly after, he became a Christian and now travels playing Christian instrumental music. Klassen now lives in Canada and over his career has produced 14 albums. And that's it from news. Coming up in sport, we catch up with 2 of the top golfers from the Invitational Tournament at the Invercargill Golf Club at the weekend. That's following the weather next. Good night.